What's going on, everyone? Week 5 is in the books, so you know what time it is. I'm coming at you with my Week 6 waiver wire pickups, so let's get right into it. Starting things off with our quarterback list, we kick things off with Jameis Winston of the Bucs. And look, the first quarter of the season was all about Ryan Fitzmagic. Now, at least for this week, I think it's going to be all about Jameis Winston because the Bucs, coming off of the bye week, they're committed to Jameis Winston now, and he gets the perfect introduction into the 2018 football season versus the Atlanta Falcons. This team has been underperforming so badly, especially defensively. Look at last week, the performance Big Ben had versus them. But it's not only last week, it's been a weekly occurrence for the Falcons. The opposing offenses that go up against them have field days, and I think Jameis Winston can do the same. I wouldn't be surprised if that entire Tampa Bay offense has a very productive day starting at the quarterback position. If he is still available, go ahead, target Jameis Winston along with other Tampa Bay options that might be available offensively, but I will mention some of those guys later on. Next up, I've got Russell Wilson. And look, it might sound crazy that he is available as a waiver wire option, but consider this. He was probably drafted as a top 5 fantasy quarterback, and the start to the season that he has had has pretty honestly been quite underwhelming. Now, undoubtedly, this has frustrated owners left and right and probably led to some premature drops. If he is still available, go ahead and pick him up. Now, the fact of the matter is, this last week versus the Rams, only 198 yards passing, but he still had 3 touchdowns. And look, Wilson usually does have these spans. The entire Seattle offense does, where they start off slow, where they kind of sputter here, and they kind of gain speed afterwards. I do think this last week could be the turning point, and now the Seattle Seahawks get a chance versus the Oakland Raiders, who, again, similar to the Atlanta Falcons, defensively have been struggling mightily. I think this week, again, can be a successful one for Russell Wilson and a plethora of his weapons as well. Next, I've got Sam Darnold. And look, it's been an up and down season for the rookie, but that is to be expected. Now, however, this last week was one of these ups with 198 yards passing, 3 touchdowns, and 1 interception. And now, versus the Indianapolis Colts defense, I think it can be a second straight productive performance. For all those worried about the passing yards that Darnold posted, look, normally I'd say when you're under 200 yards passing, I'd be a little bit worried too. But the fact of the matter is the Jets had over 300 yards rushing. So whenever it's that kind of situation, the quarterback can get a break in terms of yardage. And now looking at the Colts matchup, look, pretty much any week, I think you can go ahead and stream that matchup versus that Colts defense. They've been getting exposed defensively pretty much again, week in and week out. I think Darnold can have a productive performance, over 200 yards passing, and right around 2 touchdowns. The final quarterback on this list is Baker Mayfield. And look, I'll be the first to admit, Mayfield was a pleasant surprise this last week versus a Baltimore Ravens defense where he put up 342 yards passing, 1 touchdown, an interception, and then also added 23 yards rushing. Now, the fact of the matter is the Browns have another home game, this time with the LA Chargers coming to town. And that Chargers defense, undoubtedly so, a more friendly matchup in my opinion. And we've seen it before. The Chargers have a tendency where sometimes defensively they can have lapses and they can go ahead and allow some other teams, whether they be as talented offensively as the Chargers or not, to go ahead and put up points against them, get in some type of shootouts. We saw it with the 49ers not too long ago, and I think it can be a similar situation with Baker Mayfield. He keeps getting more experience week in and week out. I think he's getting more and more comfortable with the weapons he has around him, and considering the fact that you're going to see some bye weeks now coming up here, Baker Mayfield, not that bad of an option this week at home versus the Chargers. Getting to our wide receivers now, we start off with Robby Anderson, who had a breakout 2017 season and finally showed us a glimpse of that this week versus the Broncos with 3 receptions for 123 yards and 2 touchdowns. And look, probably a lot of owners got frustrated with Robby Anderson, maybe decided to go ahead and dump him for another waiver wire addition. But the fact of the matter is, this matchup, again, similar to the situation with Sam Darnold, this will be a favorable matchup pretty much for for the entire Jets offense. And with Robby Anderson, his usage has been trending upwards as the season has progressed. He undoubtedly is a skilled player on that offense. And I do think with Sam Darnold week in and week out, he's going to get some more comfort with him. Look, I still think Anunwa is probably the favored target over there, but Robby Anderson does have a little bit more upside in terms of big plays, and there are definitely big plays to be had versus that Colts defense. Next up, I've got Mohamed Sanu of the Falcons, a guy that had the potential of a nice matchup versus the Steelers this last week, and wouldn't you know it, 4 receptions, 73 yards, and a touchdown later. That's exactly what happened. And look, the fact of the matter is, this week, the Falcons get the Tampa Bay defense, which last time we saw them, they made Mitchell Trubisky look like a Hall of Fame quarterback with 6 touchdown passes. By no stretch of the imagination, I can comfortably say the Atlanta offense is a lot more potent than that of the Chicago Bears offense. So I anticipate big things from the Falcons offensively this week. I think it starts with Matt Ryan. It's going to translate to Ridley. It's going to translate to Julio. And I do see Mohamed Sanu also getting in on that action. Continuing on with another player from this Atlanta-Tampa Bay matchup, I've got Chris Godwin of the Bucks. Look, Godwin was probably a guy that was dropped during bye weeks. Now, if he's available, go ahead, invest a pick in him. I realize he did have some nice chemistry with Fitzpatrick, but I do think, again, in what should be a high-scoring affair, at least started by the Atlanta Falcons, Jameis Winston should have plenty of opportunities to hit, whether it's Mike Evans, Deshaun Jackson, or even Chris Godwin in the situation for potential points. I look at the matchup, Chris Godwin, incredibly favorable, and if you need a guy at the flex position, potentially a wide receiver number 2 this week based on the matchup, I really like Godwin. Next up, I've got Josh Reynolds of the Rams. And look, this edition is going to be predicated on whether Cooper Kupp and Brandon Cooks are healthy and ready to go versus the Denver Broncos defense. And the fact of the matter is, even though Reynolds only had 2 receptions for 39 yards, if those 2 guys are unavailable, you want to buy stock in Reynolds. Pretty much, you want to buy stock in any of those pass catchers that won't be Robert Woods in that Rams offense, because that offense is so potent. We've seen it week in and week out. Probably the best offense in the NFL, and if it's not all going to go to Robert Woods and Todd Gurley, so I do believe Reynolds is the next guy up. The last wide receiver that I've got in this group is Marquez Valdes Scantling of the Packers, MVS, and look, with all those Green Bay wide receivers ailing, MVS was able to go out and have a very good performance versus the Detroit Lions. Look, I realized that the Packers were down and Rodgers was just airing out the football, so maybe that did inflate some stats. He had 7 receptions for 68 yards and a touchdown, but the fact of the matter is, now the Green Bay Packers get the San Francisco 49ers at Lambeau Field. And look, if Randall Cobb is viable to miss another game, Scantling more than proved his worth in that game versus the Lions. I think he can be a nice option, potentially again, wide receiver number 2, flex appeal in week 6. Transitioning to our running backs, we have to start with the tandem in Philadelphia, Wendell Smallwood and Corey Clement. Obviously, the reason here is because of that Jay Ajayi news, torn ACL out for the year. So the question is, who will replace him and what kind of production can you expect? Personally, when looking at Ajayi's stats, I think he was a running back 2, low end at best. Definitely didn't meet expectations, but it's okay because I think one of these guys will be able to be a solid, steady running back 2 moving forward because both of them present better pass catching abilities than that of Jay Ajayi. Now, obviously, the big question is which one. This last week, Wendell Smallwood had 3 rushes for 27 yards, along with 3 receptions for 45 yards and a touchdown. Corey Clement did not play, but throughout the year so far, they have pretty similar stats, right around 27, 28 carries. Smallwood has about 150 yards, while Clement has 130. Clement has played fewer games, so that is the asterisk here, and he has been nicked up. Now, that is going to be a factor for me. Look, The Eagles play Thursday night here. It's going to be a quick turnaround. For that reason, I have Wendell Smallwood ranked ahead of Corey Clement, not only on the short turnaround, but moving forward. With all these injuries in the backfield for the Eagles, I think you got to go with the healthiest guy here. That's proven to be Wendell Smallwood. So for that reason, I am writing the hot hand per se. I'm going to prioritize Wendell Smallwood. If you can't go get him, look, Corey Clement is still worth a pickup as well. It's not 100% sure which one of these guys will emerge. So for the time being, it is worth investing in either one of those two guys. Personally, I prefer Smallwood. Next up, we have got Alfred Morris, and this one is yet another result of an injury to Matt Brate this time. Unfortunately for the 49ers, they have had awful luck with injuries offensively. First Jerick McKinnon, then Jimmy Garoppolo, now Matt Brate. Obviously, we don't know the extent of the Brate injury, but I don't think it's far-fetched to say he could probably miss some time here. And in that scenario, Morris becomes the guy to own. He was probably being dropped in some situations because Brate had emerged as the more consistent runner, definitely a better pass catcher. So if Morris is available, he had 18 carries for 61 yards after Brate went out and it was all said and done. So he, to me, is a much better option offensively at the running back position compared to some of the other names that have been showing up off waivers these last couple of weeks. If Matt Brate can't go, Morris is a viable option here versus Green Bay. The last running back on this list is Marlon Mack of the Colts, and I realize that only a short week ago we had Nyheim Hines here highlighted, and let's be honest, if you went ahead, picked him up, you were probably happy, especially if it was a PPR format. But the fact of the matter is that was a situation where T.Y. Hilton was out, Jack Doyle was out, so it was somewhat of a perfect scenario for Nyheim Hines. And if he didn't have some garbage time points late in that game, and if that game flow didn't go the way that it did with a blowout for the New England Patriots, Nyheim Hines would have had a below average night. So with all that said, he also had trouble running in between the tackles. That's why we saw some success from Jordan Wilkins. Now, with 10 days in between games for the Colts, Marlon Mack could potentially be healthy, and I truthfully do think he is the most well-rounded running back out of that entire committee for Indianapolis. For that reason, he is worth a stash moving forward. Getting to our tight ends, we start off with CJ Uzomah of the Bengals, and for 2 weeks straight now, we have two Cincinnati guys highlighting this list to start off with. Last week it was Tyler Kroft, this week it's CJ. And versus the Dolphins, I think both these guys were, for the most part, getting some even looks. But that was until Tyler Kroft exited the game with a foot injury. So now I think it's safe to say CJ is at the forefront of the favorite to replace Tyler Eifert. And I think he will get some more opportunities. Obviously, we don't know the extent of the Tyler Kroft injury, but we have to treat CJ Uzomah as the favorite moving forward. If he is still available, go ahead, pick him up, because I do think that tight end option will be a viable one in the Cincinnati offense. He finished the game with 2 receptions for 43 yards. Now this week, he gets the Pittsburgh Steelers defense. So again, a lot of these offensive options for the Bengals are going to be viable in week 6. Next up, we have Cameron Brate of the Bucks, and this one is a reminder more than anything else because highlighting the situation. Going into their bye week, O.J. Howard sustains an injury for Tampa Bay, supposed to be out 2 to 4 weeks, so that makes Cameron Brate the unquestioned starter at the tight end position. I said it before, if one of these guys went ahead and got hurt, the other becomes a top 10 tight end option. That's exactly what Cameron Brate is, maybe even better this week with a matchup versus the Atlanta Falcons. Continuing on, we have Nick Vannett of the Seattle Seahawks, and this one is just next man up. Will Dissly obviously out for the year. Vannett versus the Rams had 3 receptions for 43 yards. This is probably a little bit of a deeper league pickup here, but again, this week versus an Oakland Raiders defense, I do anticipate the Seattle Seahawks having a good matchup here, offense versus defense. I see them having some success, not only running the ball, throwing the ball as well, and Vannett is just the number 1 tight end at this point in time. Ed Dixon still hasn't returned, so for the time being, Vannett is the number 1 tight end on a Seattle offense that's starting to look a little bit better week by week, and that gets a favorable matchup in week 6 now. The final tight end we have is Austin Hooper of the Falcons, and it seems like Hooper is always a name that's floating around waiver wire additions when it comes to the tight end spot. But look, it's hard to ignore what he did versus the Steelers, 9 receptions for 77 yards, and now he goes ahead and gets that matchup versus the Tampa Bay Bucks. I'd go ahead, I'd target him. I realize it might look like you're chasing some points here. I don't anticipate him getting 9 receptions again, by no means, but the matchup is favorable. Austin Hooper has proved that he can go ahead, be a target for Matt Ryan, be a guy that can get you some nice points. I do anticipate Julio Jones rebounding in this game. I do anticipate Calvin Ridley and Mohamed Sanu being the primary guys. But again, matchup-wise, it is a favorable one for Austin Hooper. Go ahead this week, should have another fantasy viable date. And now finally, getting to our defenses, we kick things off with the Green Bay Packers. They're going to go ahead, face the San Francisco 49ers depleted offense, to say the least. No Jimmy Garoppolo, probably no Matt Brate. And they're going up to Lambeau Field, a tough place to play. Look, we saw it with the Buffalo Bills when they went ahead, visited the Green Bay Packers there. They got shut out. Now, I do think the 49ers have more talent offensively, but I could see a similar situation with the 49ers struggling. And for that reason, I like Green Bay at home versus a depleted San Francisco offense. Next up, we have the Houston Texans going up versus the Buffalo Bills, and I'm continuing this trend. Any defense, for the most part, that plays Buffalo, I'm going to go ahead and target them. Now, even though the Bills beat the Tennessee Titans this last week, Tennessee still had a decent effort defensively, and now we see the Houston Texans at home. We know what they did versus the Dallas Cowboys. They were able to go ahead, limit them offensively. I think they can do the same versus the Buffalo Bills. The tandem of Jadeveon Clowney and J.J. Watt is going to wreak havoc on Josh Allen. I anticipate at least a turnover or two coming from the Buffalo Bills, and the Houston Texans at home is a viable streaming defense this week. The last defense we have is the Seattle Seahawks going up against the Oakland Raiders, and I realize Seattle just gave up a plethora of points up against the LA Rams, but it's silly to think that the Rams offensively and the Raiders are even in the same conversation. The Raiders right now are just underperforming big time offensively and just as a whole, this entire team. So anytime you can get that matchup offensively with a struggling team, go ahead, capitalize on it. Seattle, not a bad play this week. So with that, we come to an end of this waiver wire target list. And as always, let me know what you guys thought. Are there guys here that you don't agree with, guys that you would add to this list? As always, if you have any questions, let me hear it in the comment section. And you know what to do. If you enjoyed, make sure to like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in future videos.